Okay, well, thanks, Dan, for placing me right after Andy. I have no cool Darwin quotes or jokes, and I have kind of a depressing topic, which is also not my research area, so there'll be lots of questions I can't answer later on. But the reason I wanted to talk about this was to drive home a point. Some of my students will find this familiar. Evolution impacts our health, economy, and quality of life, and we must understand it. So I wanted to bring something to talk about that would kind of bring this home. And I think Darwin would agree this is important. And I don't know if he actually ever said anything about the evolution of pests, but it's an important topic today. So when we talk about pests, or when I talk about it in this talk, I'm talking about agricultural weeds, and it turned out for time limitations, that's what I'll talk mostly about. But all of these concepts apply equally to insect pests as well, of agricultural crops, and also another hot topic in ecology, invasive exotic plants and animals that are impacting various non-agricultural systems that are under management. These impart huge losses. So we can assign dollar values to these things. They cost millions of dollars to control. They eat part of our food, and it's a pretty big chunk. It's like 30 to 40% yield losses due to weeds and animal pests. Okay, so what does evolution have to do with any of this? Well, here's the problem in a nutshell. Exposing pests to pesticides hastens the evolution of resistance to these control methods, which in turn undermines our ability to control them. And this is a problem for the reasons that I just put up. This costs us money. This leaves people hungry. And it also leaves us without the ability to take these herbicides and these pesticides into non-agricultural areas where there might also be pests and that need control. So how does this happen? Anyone recognize this weed? So maybe you don't, even if you don't know the scientific name, you probably think it looks kind of familiar. I just can't keep on top of these in my yard. If you let one of them go, they get about 8 feet tall, and they make about 1 million seeds. And they all come up the next year. So a couple of concepts to kind of give some background. All species have genetic variation. So you have genetic variation from the person that you're sitting next to. And it's not only the things we can see externally, like how tall we are, what color our skin or hair is. A lot of it's hidden. It doesn't give you a morphological difference, but it's there. So this lamb's quarter plant has got some genetic differences from the ones that are growing right around it. And where does this come from? Ultimately, the source of this is genetic mutations. Most of them are either neutral, they don't really help or hurt, or they're bad. A few of them might be good, but in both cases, it depends on the environment. So whether a genetic mutation is bad or good depends on the environment. And by random chance, if we're talking about weed species of plants, some of them will confer herbicide resistance. Or if we're talking about an insect pest, some will confer an insecticide resistance. These random mutations are already there, and in an environment without the pesticide, maybe they're really not doing anything, or maybe they're even kind of not very good. Sometimes these are physiological changes that kind of make the plant not compete very well until you put the herbicide on it, and then everything changes. So I've got this little awkward cartoon here, and I realized after I put this together, I think dandelion is a weed that there's not any herbicide-resistant strains of, but it gets the idea across. We all have get a mental image of a weed when we see this. So here's some dandelions. You spray them with a herbicide, and then what do you want to happen? You want them all to die. And that works sometimes, but if there's perhaps a random mutation in one of them that blocks or makes it not susceptible to the herbicide or blocks the action of it, then when you spray, what happens? Most of them die. And you might think, well, that's not that big a deal. I got most of them. There's only one left. And if you don't follow up with some other kind of method, then what happens? It makes a bunch of seeds, and guess what? Most of those will perhaps have that trait. So maybe you follow up, you spray again, and this time it doesn't work nearly as well. And pretty soon you have a strain of herbicide-resistant weeds. And you spray them and nothing happens. So what's really happened here is evolution by natural selection. So the exact idea that Darwin had regarding how things change over time has just happened, but it's been hastened along by our behavior in this particular case. How fast does this happen? It doesn't take millions of years to happen. Quite the opposite. It can happen in just a few years. Herbicide-resistant weeds can emerge and become problematic in just a few years following the widespread use of a herbicide. Insect pests can overcome both insecticides and pest-resistant cultivars that are bred in as little as 3 generations, which might be 3 years, or it might actually be less than that if they have multiple generations per year. So this happens fast. You don't have to wait millions of years or look at fossils that are millions of years old to see evolution happening, because it's happening right here in the U.S., or actually worldwide. 217 herbicide-resistant weed species. This was pulled off of this online database today, weedscience.com. Of 25 different biochemical modes of action that are found or have been developed in herbicides, weeds have evolved resistance to 21 of those. Some species have evolved resistance to multiple modes of action, and resistance has been evolved for 148 different herbicides. So this is a big problem, and it's just getting worse every day. That's the depressing part here. So instead of jokes, I'll send you home with that. Here's a little bit of data from this online database. You can go to it if you're interested. This is just for Illinois, so I wanted to bring this home to our backyard. The whole list wouldn't fit on the slide. This is just part of it. But these are some weeds. Here's the common names that you might be familiar with. The year that the pesticide-resistant ones were first recorded, and what modes of action of different pesticides they have. So pesticides, some of them stop photosynthesis, some of them stop amino acid synthesis, some of them break down cellular membranes, and for all of these, there are random mutations that happen in the plant species that can stop them from working. Couple of so lamb's quarters is one of an example of one. It's the one that's been in Illinois the longest, according to this database. Not lamb's quarter itself, but the resistant strains. Here's another one, common water hemp. It has evolved resistance to multiple herbicides, and it's one of the newer ones to be reported in Illinois. You can also click this button that has like the newest additions to the database. This is, if you want to get extra depressed. So and this is updated on a daily basis, or weekly at least. So you can see here, February 9th is the most recent addition, and Celera media, which is chickweed, all over my yard. A new pesticide-resistant strain was recorded in Delaware it was just recently, a few days ago, reported. So new resistant weeds emerge all the time. So although that's not bad enough, we were doing some things to speed up the process even more from the little cartoon that I just showed by our use of genetically modified organisms. And these are essentially organisms where you've taken the gene of one species and put them into the genome of another species. This is done in the laboratory. And the advantage is that it's a much faster way than traditional plant breeding to obtain desirable traits. So we're talking about genetically modified crops here. Unfortunately, it's also it's a mode of even faster evolution for the evolution of pest resistance in weeds that you're trying to fight off, or insect pests that you're trying to fight off. So an example, BT crops. Some of you who are a little older probably remember BT from back in the days before genetically modified organisms. This was a really good pesticide-free way to control certain insect pests. You could spray this bacterium on your garden plants or your crops or a forest or whatever needed some insect control. It would this bacteria infects certain insects and is lethal to many of them. It's pretty much safe in terms of its effects on people and other animals. So we've kind of eliminated the middleman here and taken the genes that make the toxin in the bacteria and just put it directly into the genome of the crops. And this has been done in corn and some other crops you can see here, mostly food crops, but also at least one timber species. Another example, Roundup-ready crops. This is something that's very close to home. So we have lots of corn and soybean growing around here, and it's virtually all Roundup-ready GMO soybeans. 90% of soybeans globally, actually these numbers are a little out of date. I just realized it's higher than that. It's like 95% of soybeans in the U.S. and probably even more corn. That's probably out of date too. Is Roundup ready. So how does this speed up the development of herbicide-resistant weeds? Well, these are crops that are already resistant to Roundup, which is a common herbicide, and so you can spray it more often. You can spray it directly on the crops and kill the weeds and not kill the crops, except that the same process is happening that I just described. So now we have some crop plants and some weeds. The crops are GMO, Roundup ready. You spray them, it doesn't hurt the crop, it kills the weeds. And that's ideally how it works. The problem is that more and more often this is breaking down after a few years. So then you have another mutation here in one of the weed plants. You spray, and they don't all die, and we know what happens now, right? The ones that survive and put out the seeds into the weed seed bank are the ones that are resistant. If we look at the development of Roundup-ready crops and the development of Roundup-resistant weeds, that's glyphosate, there's a strong correlation. So I'm going to kind of add on to this out-of-date little graph, or extend the timeline both backwards and forwards. 1980 was when Roundup was developed. It's a very useful herbicide. It's broad spectrum. It kills just about anything green that you spray it on, and then it breaks down really quickly into non-toxic byproducts, except that it doesn't kill everything green because some plants have mutations that confer resistance. 1996, we see the first use of Roundup-ready crops, and then immediately after that, we see the development of Roundup-resistant weed species. And we can extend this out to present day. There's at least 15 species of weeds. It may be more. This was as up to date as I could find that have developed resistance to this particular pesticide. So this is a global problem. Globally, we see a very significant percentage of crops that are GMO. This is out of date. It's more now. This is also out of date. These were just some nice figures from a textbook that's just a couple years old. Most of these GMO crops are crops that have genes for herbicide resistance or insect resistance or both. So they're not making GMO tomatoes that taste good, right? Those aren't in the grocery store. There are these traits that increase yield and decrease losses from pests. Pulled a couple of quotes, not from Darwin, but from a weed scientist, Michael Owen, at a recent national summit on strategies to manage herbicide-resistant weeds, who points out continues to be a disconnect between the long-term perspectives of herbicide-resistant weeds and the short-term concerns about profitability. This will continue to be a problem unless stewardship is implemented in all crop production systems immediately, which means if we want to continue to be able to have herbicides as tools to control weeds in both agricultural and non-agricultural systems, we need to start managing things better for them. So some of the things, basically, if I can just kind of cut this a little bit short here and say that proactive management is what weed scientists say that we need. In other words, we need to start thinking about the evolution of resistant weeds before they evolve when we're planning out pest management plans. So that's what I have for you today.